Welcome back to the Miller Report, Real Clear Journalism. I'm Maggie Miller. Today I'm joined by the editor of Real Clear Investigations, Peder Zane, to do a wrap up of what has been going on in the world of investigations recently. Peder, thanks so much for being here.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Maggie.
So, Peder, you sent me 4 articles for us to discuss here today. These articles reflect on continued inefficiency in regards to federal funds, the continued unraveling of California as an ideal of the American experiment, the courage of a war correspondent, and finally, how the Chinese government has infiltrated into American higher education. So, we're going to start things off by discussing the Guardian's article regarding a Ukrainian reporter's detention and death in a Russian prison. This article shares that the reporter was taken. Russia proved that they had possession of the reporter when she was given a 4-minute phone call with her family a year after she was taken, and then her body was recently sent back. So, what does this story say about the nature of the Russian regime, as well as the courage of being a journalist and a war correspondent?
Well, you really nailed it. First of all, the courage of Victoria Rushnaya, who was a Ukrainian, who was the only journalist, according to the Guardian, Ukrainian journalist who was willing to go into the front lines. She was pretty quickly kidnapped, abducted, put into a prison, and basically tortured. And they did not so much return her body, according to the article, but her remains. And I think we just, in covering war, we sometimes just tune out the brutality. And there is brutality and death in war. And then there is what the Russians are doing to far too many people. And it's just, it's hard to believe in this day and age. And yet it happens not only in Russia, but elsewhere. But the treatment, again, they didn't return her body. They returned the remains of an innocent person who was just trying to cover a story.
Just someone who's, doing their job at the end of the day, because that is what being a journalist is. I mean, even there's a reporter from Fox who got his leg blown off and then wrote a report on the courage that it takes to do that line of work. How important is it that we read and hear these stories about the journalists from their point of view and just hear about what's happening?
Well, for all of and again, I have been very critical of things that have occurred in the American media, but there is so much fantastic, courageous reporting. And really what you see, not so much in the national scene where most of the attention is paid, but look to your hometown and see the disappearance of journalism there and all the stories that aren't covered, all the things that you don't understand why they're happening, where your tax dollars are going. I think it's really much easier to see it in your local community that probably doesn't have a newspaper, or if it does, that newspaper is a shadow of what it had been 20 years ago. And all the things that you just can't find out about what are going on. So this is at a much different level, obviously covering a war and the courage that's required. But, as much as we should criticize journalists when they fail, they are the fundamental break on authority. And we are the people who tell you what's going on and exert some control over the impulses of people, with Putin being the absolute worst example today of what happens when power is unchecked.
So speaking about localizing things, Real Clear Investigations' Anna Kasparian has been turning the lens inward to her home state of California and the extensive issues that it's been facing. She's now shining light on the California penal reform and the violent criminals that it's letting loose. So the system there just seems like it's broken. They're trying to help with the overcrowding in these prisons, but their way of fixing it is just letting people back on the streets. Her report's just showing that these people are just getting rearrested.
Right. Well, and one of the things that I connect the dots of her story to a lot of the work that Vince Bielski has done on K through 12 education. And basically what you found is the bureaucracy is failing in its mission. But the ideology, often from the left, does not allow them to do the things that are required to fix things. And so what you see in the schools is a movement away from grades and tests and disciplines, which helps nobody. But what it does do in the short term is cover up the problem. What Anna was writing about was in 2013, California was ordered by the courts to relieve prison overcrowding. So what's the easiest way to relieve prison overcrowding? Build more prisons. But of course, they did not want to do that, not only because of the expense, but because of ideology that said too many people are locked up in jail that don't deserve to be there, even though all the research shows that most of the people in prison are not there because they smoked a joint. They're there because they did pretty rotten things. Jerry Brown came up with a plan in 2016. He was a architect of that and they sold it as, we are going to let nonviolent offenders, if they have good behavior and do other things, we're going to let them out of jail. But what they didn't tell people is in the run-up to that, they completely redefined what nonviolent crimes were. So it was a bait and switch. Jerry Brown also promised, when this Proposition 57 that was approved by 65% of voters, he said it maybe will be about 1,600 people a year. Well, it's thousands and tens of thousands of people. But it just gets at the difficulty of trying to fix problems by ignoring or wishing them away. And Anna's piece really captured that fundamental impulse that we see in education, we see in the federal budget, we see it all over the place, not wanting to come to grips and make the hard decisions.
Really makes you wonder, how can we fix this messed up system? I mean, I've spoken to Anna in the past, and she talks about how people need to vote, people need to do, but there's so many ways to kind of go about attacking it that I don't know what's really going to be the way that's going to make the difference.
It's very hard to tell. And again, what was also interesting about Anna's story was these reforms were a ballot measure, 65% of voters. But I don't know what they would have done if they had been told that that only 23 crimes are considered nonviolent in California. I believe it was 23 or 24. So you always like to think if people had all the information, they would agree with me. And that's not always the case. And people have different values. They have different things that they want to accomplish. So I don't know how to get out of it. But what we try to do, in some of the things we try to do in our reporting, is to just show a pattern has been to try to wish away the problems instead of confronting them. And I do know that that is not an effective way to move forward.
Definitely not. Another internal article on Real Clear Investigations highlights the waste within our system. The Fed's ignoring $4.6 billion of sketchy COVID loans. So we claim to be a government where every dollar is sacred, but there seems to be an endless stream of examples of waste, fraud, and abuse at scale.
So every day, 5 days a week, we run a feature called Waste of the Day that is produced by the great watchdog outfit Open the Books. And the piece that we've highlighted was about the Small Business Administration had failed to look into, so far at least, they failed to look into $4.6 billion of COVID spending that was flagged as possibly problematic. What's been so interesting to me, because we have both with Open the Books and our own reporting, have identified hundreds of billions of dollars of problematic spending, whether it's waste and fraud. 60 Minutes just last week did a segment about $750 billion, an estimated $750 billion of waste and fraud in the government. The crazy thing is that the government is able to come up with such massive, precise figures, and yet seems completely incapable of clawing any but a fraction of that money back. And that's a question that we are still trying to report out. And I would urge our colleagues at other outfits to try to answer this question. How is it that you know there's $750 billion of waste, fraud, and abuse, and you can claw back $20 billion. How do you have one figure but can't get there with the other? And I mean, I spent a lot of time editing pieces, looking into this, and I don't know the answer. And that is a real problem. And you see that time and again. You see that with Doge as well, where they are really good at highlighting problems, but not so good at solving the problems. And that can be, how long have we talked about the ancient systems they use for, federal payroll? Or there's a mine in Pennsylvania where they hand work the retirement papers for federal employees. So all of those are done by hand in an abandoned mine by a country that has a 8 trillion, whatever our multi-trillion dollar budget. It's insane.
So you seem to think that, Doge is bringing to light these issues that Congress is wanting to hide, but it's not really, we haven't gotten yet to the stage where we're getting that money back into our pockets.
So, it's kind of like in your personal life, it's not that hard to figure out what you're doing wrong. Making a difference, changing that behavior, you would think it'd be a little easier in government, but evidently it isn't. And I think that's really one of the things that Doge has underlined is how difficult it is that train has 1,000 cars and it's going down the track, and it just does not, change direction all that easily.
After what I've seen and, being a journalist, I don't think it's easy within government. I mean, everything we talk about is the struggles that it takes to get things to move forward. So hopefully soon enough, we'll see some forward motion with all that. Well, finally, let's talk about the article in the Stanford Review that you sent over titled, "There Are Chinese Spies at Stanford." Now, this article highlights how the Chinese are using the American education system as a way to spy on our nation and take and benefit from our intellectual property. So this all kind of surrounds Stanford's dominance in AI. Would you talk a little bit about why this is something that is a little scary?
So it's, first of all, it's a feel-good story to the extent that it was a student publication that pursued this story. And basically some student journalists got in touch with multiple professors and administrators at the school because they had heard and seen that there were students and outsiders at the school, also outsiders, who were just trying to figure out, they're not stealing state secrets so much, but they are trying to figure out what is some of the groundbreaking research that's being done at Stanford, and then take it back to the Chinese. What was most interesting about the article was almost no one would speak on the record. So they quoted many professors who said, this is a problem, and I worry and I wonder about this phone call that I got from somebody, but they didn't want to go about it on the record. Another thing they said that was very interesting is that there also seems to be an effort to recruit Americans who might be interested in spying for the Chinese. So they find people who are American citizens who are majoring in Chinese or majoring in something which might suggest that they're sympathetic to the Communist Party there. And they, according to the article, there's been some outreach. I think America is a deeply flawed, imperfect country. But I think the story about Russia and that journalist and these Chinese efforts with the spies at Stanford just show you different people around the world think differently than we do. I'm not saying we don't have spies, but there's just things going on below the surface that are interesting and troubling, and we need journalists to bring these things to light. And that story stood out to me, not because, and actually, I'll tell you one other funny thing. We ran a link this week to a story I didn't mention to you about how North Koreans are posing as job seekers, American job seekers, and getting jobs at tech companies so they can spy on them. And evidently, almost every top tech firm has been fooled by these people. They set up fake LinkedIn things, the whole kit and caboodle to try to get as much entry into American companies so that they can steal ideas. So this is all the talk about trade deals and tariffs and all that. On the ground, there are lots of other things going on. And fortunately, we have terrific investigative journalists out there, not only at RCI, but all over the place, who are uncovering this material.
I mean, it's definitely troublesome to hear that students and just like people who you wouldn't even expect just like don't feel comfortable talking about a problem that they very much see on their campus. And it's just interesting to see that something that's hyper local to Stanford, which could have broader implications to the rest of our country and what could be going on that we might not be seeing or knowing about.
Well, my guess is, on the one hand, I think a lot of schools are very dependent on foreign money, and schools are so expensive. I don't know how much more expensive they would be if they weren't having all of these foreign students paying full freight. But I think the reason that a chief reason they're afraid is that all of these big schools are dependent to one degree or another on Chinese money. And who wants to be the one who speaks out? And I guess they feel like they have a target on their back if they say something. So that's the other. So you raise a really good point. That's the other really frightening thing that's brought out by this story is the fear of trying to say, hey, a foreign adversary is trying to steal our intellectual property. Oh, I can't go public about that because my American boss might punish me. Whether they will or not, I don't know. But just the feeling that they might is pretty terrifying.
Yeah, it's definitely a very nuanced situation. Well, Peter, as we wrap things up, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I hope that people will come to our site. Real Clear is famous for its aggregation and Real Clear Investigations. Every day we provide 8 new links to some of the best investigative work being done by a wide range of sources, and it brings together work that you won't find anywhere else in one place. And we spend a lot of time reading what's being put out there so that we can find the very best pieces for our readers.
And you do a fantastic job at that. Well, Peter, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Take care.
That was it for the Miller Report, Real Clear Journalism. I'm Maggie Miller. I'll see you next time.